Wes Anderson is one of my favorite directors. His films are all such a stark contrast to the current status quo of Hollywood, and yet are eerily similar to each other. From 1930s Eastern Europe to 1960s New England, all the locales in which he creates his worlds are equally captivating, and they all manage to give the viewer a powerful sense of nostalgia for a time and place they've never experienced. One common theme I found in many of his films is what I call the 4 seasons of life. Spring, growing up, breaking the boundaries and figuring out the world. Summer, growing to accept the world you've created for yourself while fighting to maintain the idealistic world you dreamed about when you were younger. Fall, accepting your own mortality and passing on your collective wisdom to the next generation. And winter, the collapse of the status quo, the end of an era, and death. These themes are found all over Wes Anderson's work, but for the sake of this video I will be focusing on one individual film for each season. Let us begin. On top of being a fantastic love story, and an amazing metaphor for the passing of generations, Moonrise Kingdom is a perfect example of spring. Sam and Susie bond over their shared feeling that they are misplaced in the world, and are constantly fighting against their peers, parents, and the authority figures in their lives. By the end of the film, their situations haven't really gotten that much better. Their happily ever after is more of a to be continued, as they continue their struggle to find a place in the world to call home. The heartfelt story of 3 brothers' attempt to reconnect with one another after the death of their father via a trip through India is the perfect example of summer. Francis, Peter, and Jack have lost touch with each other and everything around them because the world that they came from, the same one that they fought against during their spring, is now ending. This is displayed very literally at the beginning of the movie when Peter sees his father as the train is leaving the station and rides away without him. Their distant relationship with their mother also represents this theme, and by the end of the film they have to grapple with the fact that they are just as imperfect as those that came before. On the surface, Fantastic Mr. Fox is a very simple story. I mean, it is based on a children's book, so the expectation for many people going into this film was that it would be a Wes Anderson style animated feature, but it is also a heartbreaking example of fall. The entire movie is basically about Mr. Fox's midlife crisis, but as his actions continue to put himself and those closest to him in greater danger, he comes to realize that his days of greatness are over, and he eventually comes to accept that. I think one of the best details in this movie that most people miss out on is Mr. Fox's newspaper columns, and towards the very end of the movie, we get a shot of one where he writes, "I'm not the fox I used to be, not by choice. But these days, when I look at myself in the mirror, I try to keep a straight face. At some point, maybe I won't feel the need to turn away." The Grand Budapest Hotel paints a vivid picture of winter, and not just for one person, but for the world as a whole. Before I even talk about the movie itself though, I think it's worth taking a look at what it's based on, the work of Stefan Zweig, an Austrian writer who left Europe in 1934 due to the rise of Nazis in Germany. He died in 1942 after having suffered for many years questioning the future of Europe and humanity as a whole as he watched the world around him descend into a violent conflict. The Grand Budapest Hotel paints a similar picture as it follows Mr. Gustav H. and Zero Mustafa during this time of upheaval. Weaving themes of remembrance and nostalgia, the picturesque snowy mountains and towns of Eastern Europe contrast with the modern version of the same area, which has been run down by decades of neglect. We are, however, given a glimpse of hope at the end of the film, as it cuts back to a young woman standing in a graveyard reading the events of the film. This scene has no dialogue, but I think can be summed up with a quote so often spoken during the movie. "There are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity." This final scene is a call to action for the viewer that everyone has the choice to promote civility during the heatedness of the modern era.